What if the secret to lasting weight loss isn't found in a diet book, but in a story? Today, we journey beyond calories and scales into a transformative narrative of resilience, self-discovery, and profound change. This isn't a quick fix guide. It's an intimate, honest account of one person's path to permanent wellness. If you've ever felt trapped in a cycle of starting over, or if you believe your goals are out of reach, this story is for you. Join us, find a quiet moment, and let's begin. Remember to subscribe to Health Storytellers for more weekly narratives that nourish your mind and inspire your health journey. Welcome, dear listener, to a space where health is not a headline, but a human story, to a journey measured not just in pounds lost, but in peace found. We often hear about weight loss as a battle, a war against our own bodies, fought with willpower as our only weapon. We are sold secrets in 7-day cleanses and 30-day shreds. But what if the real secret has been within us all along? Not a ruthless protocol, but a patient unfolding. Not a dramatic conquest, but a quiet homecoming. This is that story. It is one person's true journey from a place of silent struggle to a life of sustainable vitality. It is a map of the interior landscape, the doubts, the breakthroughs, the gentle revolutions that lead to lasting change. So find a comfortable space. Let the outside world soften for a while. This is not about prescribing what you should do. This is an invitation to witness what is possible, to see your own reflections in another's steps, and perhaps to begin unlocking your own secret. This is an inspiring weight loss success story for permanent change. The genesis of profound change is rarely marked by a fanfare or a dramatic catastrophe. More often, it arrives in the quiet, exhausted aftermath of 1,000 smaller surrenders. For Alex, the journey did not begin on a mountaintop or in a doctor's office, but within the confined, humid space of a bathroom on an utterly ordinary morning that finally refused to be ordinary any longer. The ritual was as ingrained as brushing teeth. The slow approach to the full-length mirror, the deliberate avoidance of the eyes, the clinical scan that commenced at the shoulders and traveled downward with forensic detachment. This was not an act of grooming, but of assessment, a daily inventory of perceived faults. The mind provided a relentless, familiar narration, a commentary on softness where there should be definition, on curves that defied the rigid, idealized lines portrayed in media. It was a silent conversation of deficiency, a meeting between self and reflection, where the agenda was perpetually set by criticism. In the corner, the digital scale gleamed under the fluorescent light. For over a decade, it had served as the ultimate arbiter of success and failure. Its 3-digit verdict could color the entire emotional landscape of a day. A lower number sparked a fragile, fleeting euphoria, a sense of hard-won order. A higher, or even stagnant, number cast a pall of frustration and self-reproach that could last for weeks. This device was not a tool, it was an oracle, and Alex had become a devout, anxious acolyte. The external evidence of this devotion was a study in paradox. Alex's smartphone housed nutrition apps with years of meticulous, soul-crushing data. The kitchen shelves held a library of diet books, each one a gospel promising salvation. The cleansing power of juice fasts, the metabolic magic of ketosis, the ancestral purity of paleo. The closet was an archaeological dig of past efforts, containing genes in a spectrum of sizes, each pair an artifact from a different era of striving and resignation. There were gym memberships, barely used, and expensive containers of protein powder that tasted faintly of chalk and disappointment. From a distance, this life might have appeared impressively disciplined. It was a portrait of someone deeply engaged with the project of self-improvement. Colleagues and acquaintances might even have described Alex as health-conscious. But this external perception was a facade, a carefully constructed performance masking an internal reality of profound disorder. Internally, Alex existed in a state of perpetual cognitive warfare. Every morsel of food was preceded by a complex calculus of permission and penalty. A salad for lunch was not nourishment. It was a good choice, earning silent points. A slice of cake at an office party was not a shared social gesture. It was a bad choice, incurring an immediate debt that demanded repayment through future restriction or punitive exercise. Life was partitioned into binary territories, on-plan days, characterized by a brittle sense of control and virtue, and off-plan days, which spiraled into guilt, anxiety, and a sense of personal failing so deep it felt existential. The cycle was a closed, self-perpetuating loop of suffering. It followed a predictable, cruel rhythm, a period of intense, white-knuckled restriction, fueled by a surge of hope and a new set of rules. This would yield a short-lived victory, often celebrated publicly as progress. But the rigidity was unsustainable. The body, craving both energy and comfort, would rebel. The mind, exhausted from the constant surveillance, would capitulate. What followed was not a simple meal, but a cascade, an episode of eating that felt less like enjoyment and more like a frantic, unconscious attempt to fill a void that nutritional science could not define. This was inevitably followed by the crash, the regret, the self-loathing, the renewed vows of even stricter discipline. The weight, after each heroic campaign, would return, often bringing additional pounds as if to underscore the futility of the fight. The central, agonizing lesson this cycle imparted was, you are failing because you are weak. Your willpower is defective. The true crisis, therefore, was not physical. It was the soul-deep exhaustion of a civil war waged within one's own being. The body had become the enemy, a separate entity to be subdued, manipulated, and criticized. Joy had been leached from the experience of eating and movement. Social occasions were minefields of anxiety. A fundamental sense of self had become entangled with a number on a scale and a size on a tag. The turning point, therefore, could not be another diet, another pinnacle of unsustainable effort. It arrived instead in a moment of pure, unadorned physical reality. It was a Tuesday, devoid of symbolic significance. Alex was late, rushing to get ready. Bending over to tie a shoe, a simple, autonomic act performed 10,000 times in a lifetime, became suddenly a profound ordeal. The breath shortened into shallow gasps. A wave of heat flushed through the body. The simple act of reaching toward a foot was met with resistance, stiffness, and a startling lack of breath. In that suspended moment, kneeling on the floor, something shifted. The constant mental noise, the calculations, the criticisms, the plans for later restriction ceased. A profound silence descended, and from within that silence, a clear, quiet voice emerged. It carried no anger, no hysteria. It was simply articulate with a final definitive truth. It said, "I am so tired of this war." The words hung in the air, not as a complaint, but as a diagnosis. This was not the tiredness of a long day, but the terminal fatigue of a conflict with no end and no honorable exit. It was the recognition that the struggle itself had become the entire purpose, a self-consuming loop that offered no peace, only varying degrees of battle. Alex slowly sat back, the untied shoe forgotten, the gaze lifted, not to the critical mirror, but inward. The realization dawned not with a flash, but with the slow, sure light of dawn illuminating a ravaged landscape. The enemy was not the body. The enemy was the war. The meticulous, exhausting, self-flagellating pursuit of control was the very pathology. Every strict rule, every cycle of punishment and reward, every external system obeyed with religious fervor had not been a path to freedom, but the bars of a self-constructed cage. The illusion was that control over the body would bring happiness. The truth was that this particular form of control was the misery. A deep, tremulous breath filled lungs that had been held in a state of perpetual tension. In that breath was the release of a decade-long held hope. The hope that the next plan, the next supplement, the next grueling workout regimen would be the final solution. That hope was laid gently to rest. In its place, a new fragile question began to form. A question that felt both terrifying and, for the first time, authentic. If not war, then what? The mirror still reflected the same physical form. But the relationship to that reflection had undergone a seismic, irreversible change. The stance of hostility softened into one of weary curiosity. The war, as Alex had known it, was over. The ceasefire was declared not in victory, but in profound, exhausted wisdom. The journey, the true, lasting journey, was not about winning a battle against oneself. It was about beginning a long, patient, and compassionate process of negotiation, understanding, and ultimately, peace. And it began with a single, untied shoe and the courageous decision to stop fighting. The declaration of a ceasefire created a profound and unsettling silence. For years, Alex's mental landscape had been dominated by the cacophony of dietary dogma, the incessant inner nutritionist critiquing every choice, the drill sergeant demanding more discipline, the accountant tallying calories and moral credits. With the decision to end the war, this noise abruptly ceased. What remained was a quiet so vast it was almost dizzying. This was not peace, not yet. It was the void that follows the demolition of a familiar, if oppressive, structure. Alex stood amidst the psychic rubble of collapsed rules, facing a simple, terrifying question. What now? This phase of the journey was not characterized by addition, but by a systematic and courageous subtraction. It was an intellectual and emotional deconstruction, a dismantling of what Alex came to think of as the cathedral of quick fixes. This internal cathedral had been under construction since adolescence, its architecture a patchwork of every magazine headline, well-meaning comment, fitness influencer's promise, and commercial diet plan's guarantee. Its stained glass windows depicted simplified parables of good and bad foods. Its pews were lined with the hymnals of restriction, its pulpit occupied by the stern, unforgiving voice of external validation. Alex had been a devout parishioner, offering up years of life energy in rituals of weighing, measuring, and self-denial. To step out of this cathedral was an act of heresy. It meant consciously rejecting the core tenets of a belief system that had provided a brittle sense of order, however miserable. The first practical steps were visceral in their symbolism. The food scale was not simply stored, it was placed in a box and put on a high shelf in the garage, a relic of a bygone era. The calorie tracking app, with its years of punishing data, was deleted. The library of diet books was donated, their dogmatic promises no longer holding any allure. This physical purge was an essential prerequisite for the mental one that followed. The initial experience of this newfound freedom was, paradoxically, fraught with anxiety. The first meal approached without a pre-assigned calorie limit or macronutrient profile felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. The old, ingrained voices, though fainter, shrieked their warnings from the depths of conditioning. This is chaos. You will lose all control. You will spiral. The autonomic nervous system, trained for years to view food as a threat or a reward, responded with a low hum of panic. The hands might tremble slightly holding a fork. The mind raced, searching for an external rule to follow and finding none. It was here that Alex introduced a new practice, not as another rigid technique, but as a lifeline of gentle inquiry, mindful eating. This was not about achieving a state of Zen perfection with every bite. It was, quite simply, the practice of reintroducing a pause and a question mark into a process that had become automatic and fraught. Before eating, Alex learned to take a single, conscious breath and pose an internal query, spoken with genuine curiosity rather than judgment. Am I physically hungry? This question alone was revolutionary. For years, eating had been triggered by time, noon equals lunch, emotion, stress equals cookies, boredom, or habit. The actual biological signal of hunger, a gentle stomach gnawing, a slight dip in energy, had been either ignored during periods of restriction or completely masked during episodes of reactive eating. Relearning this signal required patient, almost anthropological observation. Sometimes the answer was a clear yes. Other times it was a surprising no, revealing that the desire to eat was a mask for fatigue, thirst, or emotional unease. When physical hunger was present, the next question followed. What would truly satisfy me right now? This moved the decision-making from the external realm of rules. I should have a salad, to the internal realm of intuition and need. Did the body crave something warm and comforting? Something crisp and refreshing? Something substantial and protein-rich? The goal was to identify a qualitative desire, not just a quantitative one. The process of eating itself became a laboratory of awareness. Alex practiced putting the utensil down between bites. The focus shifted from the mental calculation of how much is left to the sensory experience, the texture of the food, the layers of flavor, the temperature, the aroma. The objective was to notice the moment when the pleasure of eating began to diminish, when satisfaction gently announced its arrival. This was the signal of comfortable fullness, a signal that had been bulldozed for years by the mandates to clean your plate, or the rebellious urge to eat past the point of comfort because tomorrow the diet starts again. The early experiments were messy and imperfect, which was precisely the point. There were meals where Alex ate rapidly, old habits reasserting themselves, and only recognized fullness when it had tipped into discomfort. Instead of meting out punishment, the new protocol was to observe this with neutral curiosity. Interesting. I was distracted by the television and missed my body's signals. I feel uncomfortably full now. How does that feel physically? What might I do differently next time? This was a radical departure from the previous script of guilt and self-flagellation. Similarly, there was the intentional experiment with a forbidden food, a chocolate chip cookie, perhaps. Alex would buy a single high-quality cookie, sit at a table with no distractions, and eat it slowly. The mission was not to eat it, but to experience it. To notice the crisp exterior giving way to a soft center, the bursts of sweet chocolate, the buttery richness. The discovery was profound. When eaten with full attention and without a backdrop of guilt, the cookie was deeply satisfying. A few mindful bites often provided more pleasure than a previous whole bag eaten in a shame-filled trance. The cookie, stripped of its symbolic power as a cheat or a sin, was simply a cookie, a pleasant, occasional experience of taste and texture. Nutrition was not abandoned in this process, but its role was utterly transformed. It shifted from a tyrannical commander issuing decrees to a respectful consultant offering information. The black and white language of allowed and forbidden was replaced with a spectrum of nourishment. The guiding principle became addition, not subtraction. Instead of thinking, I can't have pasta, the thought became, how can I make this meal more nourishing and satisfying? A handful of spinach tossed into the pasta sauce for fiber and micronutrients. A lean protein added to create sustained energy. A serving of healthy fats to promote satiety and flavor. This was the practice of gentle nutrition, the art of choosing foods that honor both physical health and hedonic pleasure, understanding that these are not mutually exclusive. The secret unlocked in this phase of unlearning was deceptively simple, yet existentially significant. Food is not a moral issue. It is macronutrients and micronutrients. It is energy and information for the body. It is culture, memory, and connection. It is at times a profound source of pleasure. By painstakingly separating food from the lexicon of virtue and vice, Alex was removing a heavy, wet cloak of shame that had been worn for so long it had come to feel like skin itself. The energy that had once been entirely consumed by the obsessive planning, logging, and guilt-tripping of the dietary war began to slowly, drip by drip, become available for other purposes. It was a cognitive and emotional tax refund. This freed-up bandwidth did not immediately solve all of life's problems, but it created space. Space for a thought to be finished, for a moment of beauty to be noticed, for a conversation to be truly heard. The constant low-grade anxiety that had been a background hum for years began to diminish. The scale of experience was tipping. The weight of obsession was lessening, and in its place, a fragile but growing sense of agency and peace was beginning to assert itself. The foundation of the old cathedral was cleared, making room not for another rigid temple, but for the open sky of authentic self-trust. If the relationship with food had been a battlefield of restriction and rebellion, the relationship with movement existed in the parallel domain of punitive labor. Exercise, for Alex, was not an activity. It was a sentence. It was a mandatory atonement for dietary transgressions, a grim deposit required to secure caloric credit for future meals. The gym was not a place of empowerment, but a debt collection agency for the body, where sweat was the currency of penance. Every lunge, every minute on the treadmill, every lifted weight was underscored by a silent, joyless calculation. How much have I earned? How much do I still need to burn? Movement was a transaction, and the body was the inefficient, disappointing machine being forcibly overhauled. This paradigm, Alex now understood with crystalline clarity, was not only unsustainable, but fundamentally corrosive. It transformed what could be a source of vitality into a wellspring of dread. The goal had always been to change the body, to shrink it, sculpt it, dominate it into submission. The inherent message was that the body in its present state was unacceptable, and suffering through movement was the price of admission to a better future. But having declared a ceasefire in the dietary war, this perspective on exercise became untenable. If food was no longer a moral ledger, then movement could no longer be its punishment. Thus began the second great experiment, a radical redefinition of physical activity. Alex proposed a simple yet profoundly challenging rule. For 1 month, you may only engage in movement that feels genuinely good, accessible, and even pleasurable to your body in the present moment. The criteria shifted from external metrics, calories burned, miles run, pounds lifted, to a single internal question. How does this feel? The first forays into this new territory were marked by a deep, almost paralyzing sense of disorientation and residual guilt. The ingrained ethos of no pain, no gain was a powerful ghost. To walk into a gym and not push to the point of breathlessness felt like laziness, a moral failing. The old drill sergeant in Alex's mind scoffed at the idea of a gentle workout. The initial sessions felt fraudulent, as if Alex were getting away with something. The breakthrough came not in a fitness facility, but in the living room. One afternoon, a sense of restless energy simmered, the kind that in the past might have been funneled into a punishing run. Instead, Alex turned on a piece of music. Not a high BPM workout track, but a song loved since adolescence, one that evoked memory and emotion. Standing in the middle of the room, Alex simply began to move. At first, it was just a slow sway. Then, as the music built, the movement became more expansive. Arms reaching, feet taking small steps, a turn, a dip. It was not dancing in any performative sense. It was the body expressing the energy of the sound. There was no audience, no routine, no judgment. For 10 minutes, Alex was wholly immersed in the kinetic joy of rhythm. When the song ended, the feeling was not exhaustion, but invigoration. Not depletion, but liberation. The movement had served the emotion, not the other way around. This became a touchstone. Movement began to be framed as a dialogue, a two-way communication with the physical self. The body was no longer a mute object to be commanded, but a sentient partner with its own intelligence and language. If the body whispered of stiffness and tension from hours at a desk, the answer became a series of long, luxurious cat-like stretches or a restorative yoga sequence focused on release rather than achievement. If the body hummed with anxious, trapped energy, the answer became a brisk walk in the neighborhood, where the rhythm of footsteps could help organize scattered thoughts, and the sensory input of fresh air and changing scenery could act as a gentle reset for the nervous system. Alex discovered forms of movement that had been invisible under the old paradigm. Swimming became less about laps and more about the meditative, weightless silence of being submerged. The feeling of water supporting joints that had historically ached under impact. A simple hike on a wooded trail shifted focus from reaching the summit to noticing the dappled light through the leaves, the sound of birdsong, the feeling of uneven earth underfoot requiring mindful balance. Strength training, when approached, was reframed. Instead of lifting to burn or sculpt, Alex explored lifting to feel capable. The question became, what can my body do? Celebrating the ability to carry heavy groceries, to lift a suitcase, to rise from the floor with ease. Function replaced aesthetics as the primary motivator. This shift from adversary to ally was perhaps the most transformative element of the journey thus far. The body began to be perceived not as a problem to be solved, but as an instrument of experience. Its signals, the ache of a muscle recovering, the gentle fatigue after a long walk, the deep breath after a stretch, were no longer interpreted as pains to be endured, but as feedback to be respected. Alex learned to distinguish between the good hurt of muscles being healthily challenged and the bad hurt of potential injury, and to respond accordingly with rest or modification. The physiological benefits of this consistent, kind movement were undeniable and emerged organically. Sleep quality improved, as the body now experienced physical tiredness rather than nervous exhaustion. Energy levels throughout the day became more stable. A subtle, functional strength developed, the kind that makes daily life easier. Posture often improved, not from conscious effort, but because a body engaged in joyful movement naturally finds more efficient, open alignment. But these were secondary gifts. The primary, revolutionary outcome was that movement became self-reinforcing. It was no longer a chore to be scheduled and endured. It became a resource, a tool for self-regulation, and a source of genuine pleasure. On a stressful day, the thought of a walk became appealing, a known strategy for clearing the mind. On a day of low energy, a few gentle stretches felt like a gift of care, not a duty. The secret unlocked in this foundational shift was a corrective to a pervasive cultural fallacy. Consistency in movement is not born from grim discipline alone, but from cultivated enjoyment and perceived benefit. When physical activity is framed as a conversation, a celebration of capability, or a moving meditation, the motivation to engage comes from a deep internal well of self-care. It ceases to be something you make yourself do and becomes something you get to do. The body, once the perceived antagonist in the story of weight loss, was now being revealed as the most faithful companion on the journey toward holistic well-being. It was learning to speak, and Alex was learning, with growing reverence, to listen. With the storms around food and exercise gradually quieting into a sustainable, gentle rhythm, a new and more profound landscape began to emerge into view. It was as if the frantic noise of daily dietary management had been a static obscuring a deeper, more resonant signal. As that static faded, Alex was left with a profound and unsettling quietude, one that was not immediately peaceful. In this new silence, long-ignored frequencies became audible. The low hum of anxiety on a Sunday evening, the sharp ping of stress before a deadline, the hollow echo of loneliness after a social gathering, the familiar, dull ache of an old, unhealed narrative of inadequacy. It was in this quiet that a pivotal pattern crystallized. Alex began to notice, with almost scientific detachment, that the urge to eat, specifically to eat in a mindless, urgent, or comforting way, rarely coincided with physical stomach hunger. Instead, it mapped precisely onto emotional or psychological states. A difficult conversation with a supervisor would trigger a powerful pull toward the vending machine, not for sustenance, but for the tactile distraction of chewing, and the sugar rush that promised a fleeting surge of false equanimity. A sense of boredom or lethargy in the mid-afternoon would manifest as a craving for something crunchy and salty, a sensory stimulation to puncture the monotony. Feelings of loneliness or social awkwardness created a phantom hunger for creamy sweet foods, a subconscious attempt to replicate the warmth of comfort and connection. This observation led to the core, transformative insight of the entire journey. The weight for Alex was not merely a physical state. In many significant ways, it had been a solution. It was a protective layer, a tangible manifestation of intangible struggles. It had served as a distraction from emotional pain, a fortress against perceived vulnerabilities, a comforting habit in the face of uncertainty, and at times, a passive expression of anger or a declaration of a need for space. Food had been the primary, albeit inefficient and ultimately damaging, coping mechanism for dealing with the stresses of being human. To create a permanent change in the physical body, it was now imperative to address the deeper well from which these behaviors sprang. This was the most courageous and vulnerable phase of the transformation. It required turning toward discomfort with curiosity instead of reaching for the pantry to make it disappear. Alex embarked on what can only be described as an archaeological dig into the self. The tools for this excavation were not scales or meal plans, but journal entries, moments of silent reflection, and a new, revolutionary practice, self-compassion. The food log was permanently retired. In its place, Alex began keeping a feeling log. At moments of non-physical hunger, the practice was to pause and pose a different kind of question. Not, what can I eat, but what am I truly hungry for? The answers, scribbled in a notebook without censorship, were illuminating. They were rarely about food. They were cries for rest, peace, connection, relief, stimulation, safety, courage. The craving for a chocolate bar was often, upon investigation, a hunger for a moment of personal sweetness in a demanding day. The desire for a bag of chips was frequently a need for a visceral, cathartic crunch to release pent-up frustration. Armed with this new awareness, Alex began to build a toolbox of non-food responses to these identified needs. This was the process of learning a new language of self-care, one where the body's signals were interpreted as emotional or spiritual communications. If the diagnosed need was stress relief, the new protocol might involve a 10-minute guided meditation, a series of deep, diaphragmatic breaths at the desk, or a brisk walk around the block to metabolize the cortisol. If the need was comfort, the action might involve wrapping oneself in a soft blanket, brewing a cup of herbal tea, or revisiting a beloved, comforting book. If the need was connection, the response became reaching out to a trusted friend for a genuine conversation, not just scrolling through social media. This required the development of a skill far more critical than willpower, the skill of boundary setting. Alex learned that chronic overcommitment and people-pleasing were significant sources of stress that directly fueled emotional eating. Saying no to a non-essential request became an act of profound self-respect, a way of protecting the newfound inner equilibrium. It was a declaration that personal well-being was a legitimate and non-negotiable priority. Central to navigating this deep emotional work was the cultivation of self-compassion. This was the antithesis of the old, critical inner voice that had dominated for decades. Alex practiced speaking to oneself with the kindness, patience, and understanding one would naturally offer a dear friend in distress. When a moment of old pattern emotional eating occurred, the response was no longer a barrage of self-condemnation. "You're so weak. You've ruined everything." Instead, it became a gentle internal dialogue. "This is a moment of suffering. I was feeling overwhelmed, and I used an old habit to cope. It's understandable. Everyone struggles. What do I need to care for myself right now?" This practice of self-compassion was not permissiveness, it was wisdom. It recognized that shame and punishment only drive the cycle of pain and reactive behavior deeper. By meeting setbacks with curiosity and kindness, Alex disarmed their power. Each episode became a data point, not a definition of failure. The secret unlocked in this deep, quiet work was the master key to permanent change. Sustainable physical transformation occurs not by fighting symptoms, but by healing the underlying conditions that gave rise to them. The body, no longer needed as a storage unit for unmet emotional needs or a fortress against the world, began to naturally release what it no longer had to hold. The physical weight loss during this phase was often steady, but it felt almost secondary. The more remarkable change was the profound emotional and psychological lightness that accompanied it. It was the lightness of setting down a burden carried for years. The lightness of understanding one's own triggers and having tools to address them. The lightness of self-awareness replacing self-loathing. Alex was not just shedding pounds. Alex was shedding identities. The identity of the person who needed food to cope. The identity of the perpetual dieter. The identity forged in a narrative of not being good enough. The body's changing shape began to truly mirror an internal metamorphosis. A shift from a dense, defended structure to one that was more authentic, resilient, and at peace. The journey had moved from manipulating the exterior to healing the interior, and in doing so, had discovered the true source of lasting change. To observe Alex's life today is not to witness a dramatic before and after photograph, but to experience the quiet, steady hum of sustainable equilibrium. The transformation is woven into the fabric of daily existence, subtle yet fundamental, like the shift in light from morning to afternoon. There is no designated diet or program in operation. Instead, there exists a fluent, intuitive way of eating, a gentle rhythm that honors hunger, respects fullness, seeks nourishment, and makes generous room for pleasure without apology. Food has resumed its rightful place as one of life's many dimensions, not its central, preoccupying drama. Similarly, there is no grueling workout regime dictated by the calendar. In its place is a natural, responsive rhythm of movement. This rhythm might include morning stretches to greet the day, an evening walk to process its events, a weekend hike for adventure, or a spontaneous dance in the kitchen while cooking. Movement is no longer a scheduled obligation, but an organic expression of how the body feels and what the spirit needs. It is a conversation that continues, fluid and unforced. The physical weight, after its gradual descent, found its equilibrium, a stable range where the body seems to function with optimal energy and ease. The closet, once an archive of past sizes, now contains clothes that fit the present body, chosen for comfort and expression, not as aspirational trophies or shameful reminders. The bathroom scale, if it remains at all, has been demoted from oracle to occasional instrument. Its reading is viewed with the detached interest one might give to a weather report, informational but not determinative of the day's emotional climate. This state is not a finish line, gleaming in the distance after a race. It is better understood as a sustainable, integrated system for living. The true test of any transformation is not its peak, but its resilience in the valleys. Holidays, vacations, periods of intense professional stress, or personal grief are no longer perceived as existential threats to a rigid plan. They are recognized as natural phases of a human life. The sophisticated toolkit, forged in the fires of unlearning and self-discovery, is now readily available. At a festive gathering, Alex can savor a slice of pie with genuine enjoyment, free from the shadow of guilt. because the next meal will naturally return to a more vegetable-centric plate, not as penance, but as what the body will likely crave. During a stressful week where work consumes all mental bandwidth, movement might simplify to 5 minutes of deep breathing or a walk around the block, with zero self-reproach for not doing enough. A period of emotional turmoil might lead to a few days of less mindful eating, but instead of spiraling into a narrative of failure, Alex now recognizes the pattern, offers self-compassion, and gently re-engages the tools of journaling or seeking connection. The system is self-correcting because it is built not on rules, but on awareness and self-trust. The most profound outcome, however, transcends all physical metrics. It is the quality of internal silence. The constant, critical inner commentary, the voice that quantified every bite and judged every curve, has largely fallen quiet. The mental energy once expended on that internal civil war has been liberated. It now fuels presence in conversations, creativity in hobbies, patience in relationships, and a deeper engagement with the world. The preoccupation with the body's appearance has been replaced by a profound appreciation for its function, its strength, its resilience, its capacity for sensation and pleasure. Alex discovered that the ultimate goal was never to become a different person. It was a journey of returning, of reuniting with the essential self that existed before the world layered on its complex rules, judgments, and conditional approvals regarding the body. It was about rediscovering the innate biological wisdom of hunger and satiety that we are all born with. It was about reclaiming the primal, joyful impulse to move. It was about honoring the fundamental human need for compassionate self-care. The secret, once finally and fully unlocked, revealed itself to be elegantly simple yet infinitely profound. Permanent change is not an outcome you force upon yourself through sheer willpower. It is a home you build within yourself. A home constructed brick by compassionate brick, choice by conscious choice. Its foundation is self-awareness, its walls are self-respect, and its roof is self-trust. It is a shelter from the storms of external judgment and internal criticism. Within this home, there is no need for declarations of war on one's own flesh. There is only the ongoing, gentle art of living in alignment. The pursuit of health is no longer a violent extraction of value from the body, but a peaceful collaboration with it. The story does not end here, for it is an ever-evolving narrative of a life being lived, not a problem that has been solved. But once you have built this home within yourself and learned the profound comfort of residing there, you have no desire to leave. The journey culminates not in a destination, but in a lasting, peaceful residence in one's own life. Alex's journey is a single, beautiful thread in the vast tapestry of human experience with health. It reminds us that our bodies are not problems to be solved, but stories to be listened to. That the most powerful transformations often begin with a whisper of self-kindness, not a shout of rigid rules. If this story resonated with you, if you saw glimpses of your own path in these words, then you are already part of our community here at Health Storytellers. This channel is dedicated to sharing these human narratives, the struggles, the insights, the quiet victories that never make magazine covers, but that change lives from the inside out. We believe that inspiration is the most powerful nutrient, that by sharing true stories, we create a space of understanding, empathy, and possibility. So we invite you, hit the subscribe button and tap the bell icon. Let Health Storytellers be your weekly companion in wellness. We have more stories to share of finding strength, managing stress, cultivating joy, and navigating the complex, beautiful journey of being human. Share your thoughts, your own insights, or just a simple hello in the comments below. Let's build this community of listeners and storytellers together, because your health story matters. And sometimes hearing another's is the key that helps you begin writing your own next, most empowering chapter. Thank you for listening. Be gentle with yourself. And until next time, take good care.